A flash of lightning revealed two ghostly figures huddled against her barn. They weren't phantoms. They were horses, their bodies etched with ice and desperation. But letting them in meant inviting a danger far worse than the storm raging across the Montana plains. The wind howled like a banshee, a sound Abigail Hayes knew all too well. It was the voice of Montana winter, a relentless beast that clawed at the walls of her small, weathered cabin and promised to devour anything left exposed. At 22, with her grandfather's ranch resting on her young shoulders, Abigail had learned to respect that voice. She had learned to prepare, to conserve, and to endure. The small pile of firewood by her hearth was a testament to days of back-breaking labor, and the scent of thin vegetable soup simmering on the stove was the smell of careful rationing. Her grandfather, a man carved from the very same rugged landscape, had been gone for 2 years now. He had left her with the ranch, a mountain of debt, and a lifetime of wisdom. His favorite saying echoed in her mind on nights like this. Nature doesn't hate you, Abby girl. It just doesn't care if you live or die. It's your job to give it a reason to notice you. Tonight, nature was putting her to the test. The blizzard had descended without mercy, burying fence posts and turning the familiar world into a swirling vortex of white. Her own small herd of cattle was safe, huddled in the far end of the sturdy barn her grandfather had built with his own 2 hands. She had checked on them an hour ago, their warm breath misting in the cold air, their quiet chewing a comforting rhythm against the storm's fury. She was settling into her worn armchair, a faded quilt pulled over her knees, when a sound cut through the wind's shriek. It was a heavy, rhythmic thud against the main barn door, not the frantic scratching of a lost coyote or the weight of a snowdrift. This was deliberate, persistent. Abigail frowned, setting her mug of weak tea aside. Who on earth would be out in this? No sane person traveled in a whiteout. Her heart gave a slight flutter of unease. The ranch was isolated, miles from a nearest neighbor, and even further from the sleepy town of Harmony Creek. Visitors were rare on the best of days. In a blizzard, they were unheard of. The thudding came again, more insistent this time, followed by a low, mournful sound that was nearly stolen by the wind. It was a whinny, a horse. Her brow furrowed. It couldn't be one of hers. Her 3 aging ranch horses were secure in their stalls. Pushing herself from the chair, she pulled on her thickest coat, wrapped a wool scarf around her face until only her eyes were visible, and grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from its hook by the door. The cold hit her like a physical blow the moment she stepped onto the porch. Snow whipped at her face, sharp and biting. She aimed the flashlight's beam toward the barn. The light cut a shaky path through the chaos, illuminating a world of frantic, dancing snowflakes. And then she saw them. 2 horses, pressed against the massive sliding door of the barn. They were specters in the storm, their coats so caked with snow and ice they seemed to be carved from the blizzard itself. One was a large, dark stallion, his head low. The other, a slightly smaller mare, stood beside him, her body trembling violently. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen animals look so utterly defeated. They weren't wild mustangs. Their builds were too refined. They were someone's stock. But no rancher she knew would be careless enough to leave their horses out in a storm like this. She took a cautious step forward, her boots sinking deep into the fresh powder. As she drew closer, the stallion lifted his head. His eyes, wide and dark, seemed to find her in the swirling snow. There was no fire in them, no wildness, only a desperate, intelligent plea. He nudged the mare gently with his muzzle, as if to say, "Look, help is here." The mare let out another weak whinny, a sound of pure misery. Compassion warred with caution in Abigail's heart. Taking in strange animals was a risk. They could be sick, injured, or carry disease that could spread to her own livestock. In her precarious financial state, a vet bill was a disaster she couldn't afford. Yet, the image of them freezing to death just yards from her warm, hay-filled barn was unthinkable. Her grandfather's voice was back, clear as if he were standing beside her. "You don't turn your back on a creature in need, Abby girl. Not if you want to call yourself human." Her decision was made. All right, I'm coming," she called out, her voice raspy against the wind. "Hold on." Fighting her way through the deepening snow, she reached the barn door. Her fingers, already numb with cold, fumbled with the heavy wooden latch. The door groaned in protest as she put her shoulder into it, sliding it open just enough for a person and a horse to slip through. The smell of hay and warm animals washed over her, a stark contrast to the frozen hell outside. She shone the light inside, gesturing. "Come on, in you go. It's safe." The stallion hesitated for only a second, then guided the mare forward with another gentle nudge. They moved with a painful slowness, their hooves dragging. The mare stumbled on the threshold, and the stallion put his body against hers, steadying her until she found her footing. It was a display of loyalty and care that struck Abigail to her core. Once they were both inside, she slid the heavy door shut, sealing out the storm. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the wind's muffled howl and the ragged, heavy breathing of the two horses. Abigail leaned against the door, her own breath coming in shaky clouds. The lantern hanging from a central beam cast a warm, golden glow over the scene. Now that they were out of the storm, she could see the true state they were in. They were dangerously thin, their ribs visible even under their thick, matted winter coats. Ice clung to their manes and tails in heavy clumps. The mare's head hung low, and a tremor ran through her entire body without ceasing. As she moved closer to inspect them, her light fell upon the stallion's hip, and her blood ran cold. There, seared into his hide, was a brand she recognized with a jolt of pure dread. It was the double-barbed T of Marcus Thorne's Triple T Ranch. Marcus Thorne. The name left a bitter taste in her mouth. He was the wealthiest rancher in the county, a man known for his ambition, his prize-winning stock, and his cruel, unforgiving nature. Stories about him were whispered in the feed store and the local diner. Stories of overworked animals, harsh punishments for his ranch hands, and a temper as vicious as a cornered rattlesnake. He saw his animals not as living creatures, but as assets, investments to be protected with ruthless efficiency. These weren't just any stray horses. They were the property of Marcus Thorne, and helping them had just become a crime. Stealing livestock, even with the best intentions, was a serious offense in this part of the country. Thorne would not see it as an act of mercy. He would see it as theft, and he would come after her with the full force of his wealth and the law. Abigail's mind raced. She could turn them back out, pretend she never saw them. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. It would protect her, her ranch, the fragile life she had scraped together from the ashes of her grief. She looked at the mare. The horse had finally stopped shaking and was now leaning her head against the stallion's neck, her eyes half closed in exhaustion. The stallion stood like a statue, a silent guardian, though he looked ready to collapse himself. They had come to her, had begged at her door for refuge. They had trusted her. She thought of her grandfather again, of his calloused hands and his unwavering moral compass. He had always stood up to men like Thorne, quietly and without fanfare. He believed that a person's character was measured by how they treated the helpless. A new resolve hardened within her. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when two lives were hanging in the balance. Marcus Thorne and his reputation could wait. These horses couldn't. "Okay," she whispered into the quiet of the barn, her voice firm. "You're here now. You're safe. We'll figure out the rest later." She strode over to an empty stall, one that hadn't been used in years, and unlatched the gate. It was clean and dry, with a thick bed of old straw in the corner. "Come on," she said softly, clicking her tongue. "This way." The stallion watched her, his dark eyes intelligent and assessing. After a long moment, as if he had weighed her intentions and found them true, he gently nudged the mare forward. They walked into the stall together, a silent, unified pair. Abigail filled a trough with fresh water and another with her best hay she had been saving for the harshest part of the winter for her own animals. They fell upon the food and water not with frenzy, but with a deep, desperate weariness. As they ate, Abigail took a burlap sack and began to gently rub the ice and snow from their coats. She started with the stallion, working slowly, speaking to him in a low, soothing murmur. "There now, let's get you warm." He flinched at her first touch, his muscles tight with tension, but he didn't pull away. As she worked, he gradually relaxed, letting out a long, shuddering sigh. When she moved to the mare, She noticed the horse was favoring her left foreleg. Abigail ran a gentle hand down the leg, her experienced fingers searching for heat or swelling. The mare grunted in pain when she reached the fetlock. There was a nasty-looking cut there, old and inflamed, likely from a run-in with barbed wire. It was infected, the skin around it puffy and hot to the touch. But that wasn't the worst of it. As her hands moved over the mare's sides, she felt a subtle, unmistakable roundness to her belly. Abigail's heart sank. The mare was pregnant, and in that moment, Abigail Hayes knew her life had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. This wasn't just about sheltering 2 horses from storm anymore. This was about protecting a family. And she had a sinking feeling that Marcus Thorne was not the kind of man who would take kindly to his property, finding a safe haven, especially not on the struggling ranch of a poor girl with nothing to her name but a legacy of kindness. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one she had just invited into her life. The hours after settling the horses were a blur of quiet, methodical work. Abigail moved with a sense of purpose that pushed her fear into a distant corner of her mind. First, she tended to the mare's leg. She fetched the old wooden first aid box from the tack room, its contents a collection of her grandfather's time-tested remedies. There were jars of pine tar salve, rolls of clean cotton bandages, and a bottle of antiseptic that stung just to look at. "All right, sweet girl," she murmured, approaching the mare, who had finished her hay and was now watching her with weary eyes. The stallion stood protectively at her side, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to look at that leg." She knelt in the straw, moving slowly so as not to spook them. The stallion let out a low rumble in his chest, a clear warning. "I know, big fella. You're looking out for her," Abigail said, not looking at him directly, but keeping her voice calm and steady. "And I'm going to help you do that." She gently lifted the mare's hoof. The horse flinched but allowed it. Abigail cleaned the wound as best she could with warm water and a soft cloth, flushing out the dirt and grime. The cut was deeper than she'd first thought, angry and red. Applying the antiseptic, she earned a pained snort from the mare, but the animal held steady, as if she understood. Abigail slathered the wound in a thick layer of salve and wrapped it carefully with a clean bandage. "There," she whispered, patting the mare's shoulder. "That should feel a little better." With the immediate medical needs addressed, she turned her attention to their overall condition. She ran her hands over their bodies again, this time more thoroughly. Underneath their matted, filthy coats, she discovered a map of cruelty. Both horses had faint, crisscrossing scars on their backs and hindquarters, the telltale marks of a whip used too often and too hard. Their hip bones jutted out sharply, a clear sign of prolonged malnutrition. A cold, hard anger began to build in her chest, replacing the fear. This wasn't neglect born from ignorance or poverty. This was deliberate cruelty. Marcus Thorne, with all his money and prize-winning ribbons, was starving and abusing his animals. These 2 hadn't just run from a storm. They had run from a monster. She spent the better part of an hour currying them, using a soft brush to work through the knots and clumps of ice in their manes and tails. It was a slow, intimate process. With each stroke, she felt the tension leaving their bodies. The stallion eventually rested his great head on her shoulder, his sigh a warm puff of air against her neck. The mare leaned into her, her soft muzzle brushing against Abigail's braided blonde hair. In that quiet, shared space, a silent pact was formed. They were hers to protect now, no matter the cost. Exhausted but resolute, she finally left the barn, making sure the door was securely latched behind her. Back in the cabin, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. She added a few more logs, the crackle, and pop a comforting sound in the lonely quiet. She ate her soup, though she barely tasted it, her mind consumed with what lay ahead. She was a thief. In the eyes of the law, that's what she was. And Marcus Thorne was a powerful man. He had the sheriff in his pocket, a friendship built on campaign donations, and shared cigars at the county fair. If he found his horses here, he wouldn't just take them back. He'd make an example of her. He could have her arrested, her ranch seized to pay for his stolen property. He could destroy the one thing her grandfather had left her. Sleep did not come easily. She lay in her bed, listening to the wind rage outside, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and defiance. Every creak of the old cabin made her jump, her heart pounding at the thought that Thorn and his ranch hands might already be out searching, even in this weather. The next morning, the world was transformed. The wind had died, leaving behind a profound, crystalline silence. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the sun glittered on a landscape buried under 2 feet of pristine snow. It was beautiful, but it was also treacherous. The snow would hold tracks. Her first thought was of the horses. She pulled on her boots and coat and trudged to the barn, her path a deep trench in the white blanket. Inside, the 2 animals greeted her with soft nickers. They looked remarkably better. Rest, food, and warmth had worked a small miracle. The mare was putting a little more weight on her injured leg, and the stallion's eyes had lost their haunted, desperate look. Abigail spent the morning tending to them, giving them more hay and fresh water, and checking the mare's bandage. She named them, a quiet act of claiming them as her own, at least for now. The mare, with her gentle spirit and the new life she carried, she called Hope. The stallion, for his steadfast, protective nature, became Valor. As the day wore on, a new anxiety began to creep in. Her supplies were finite. She had enough hay for her own animals to last another few weeks, if she was careful. Adding 2 more, especially 2 that needed extra nutrition, would strain her resources to the breaking point. And then there was the issue of the mare, Hope. A pregnant mare needed special feed, supplements, and a clean, safe place to foal. Abigail had none of that. She was a cattle rancher, not a horse breeder. The reality of her situation settled in heavily. She couldn't keep them here forever. She needed a plan. But what could she do? She couldn't sell them. They weren't hers. She couldn't turn them over to the sheriff. He'd just return them to Thorn. And she certainly couldn't give them back to the man who had hurt them so badly. She was trapped. Late in the afternoon, she saw a plume of smoke rising in the distance. It was from the chimney of Frank Miller's place, her closest neighbor, though close was a relative term out here, meaning a good 2 miles away. Frank was a gruff, solitary man in his late 60s, a gossip who missed nothing. If anyone were to notice something amiss, it would be him. As if summoned by her thoughts, a dark shape appeared on the horizon, moving steadily toward her ranch. It was a snowmobile. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was Frank. She quickly ran to the barn, making sure the main door was closed and there were no telltale signs of her new guests. She scattered some fresh straw to cover any tracks near the entrance. Rushing back to the cabin, she tried to compose herself, to look casual, as if she hadn't a care in the world. Frank Miller pulled up to her porch. His face, weathered and wrinkled as old leather, was bundled in a thick scarf. He killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening. "Abigail," he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "Figured I'd check on ya. Nasty storm." "I'm all right, Frank. Thanks for coming by," she said, forcing a smile. "Cabin held up fine. Cattle are all good." His eyes, small and sharp, scanned her property. They lingered for a moment on the barn. "Heard a rumor down at the feed store this morning. Before the lines went down. Marcus Thorne lost a couple of horses. A prize stallion and a broodmare, they say. Seems they broke through a fence in the storm." Abigail's blood ran cold. She struggled to keep her expression neutral. "Is that so? You'd think a man like Thorne would have better fences." She hoped the subtle dig would sound natural. Frank's gaze was penetrating. "Ah, you would. He's offering a reward. A big one. $5,000. $5,000. The amount hung in the air between them. It was a fortune to Abigail. It would pay off a huge chunk of her debt. It would buy enough feed for 2 winters. It would mean she could finally sleep without the constant worry of foreclosure gnawing at her. All she had to do was make one phone call. She looked at Frank, at his suspicious, knowing eyes. Had he seen something? Had he heard the whinny on the wind? "Well, I hope he finds them," she said, her voice sounding thin to her own ears. "A reward like that. I'm sure everyone in the county will be looking." "Everyone is," Frank confirmed, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Just thought you should know. A girl like you, struggling out here alone, that kind of money could change things." Was it a warning? A test? Abigail couldn't be sure, but the implication was clear. Frank was telling her he knew she could use the money, and that he knew Thorne's horses were missing. He was leaving the rest up to her. "I appreciate you looking out for me, Frank," she said, meeting his gaze directly. But my grandfather taught me that some things are more important than money. A flicker of something. Was it respect? Passed through his eyes. He gave a curt nod. Your granddaddy was a good man. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man. He revved the engine of his snowmobile. Well, stay warm, Abigail. And with that, he was gone, leaving her alone with his words hanging in the frigid air. The conversation had terrified her, but it had also solidified her resolve. The reward meant nothing. Thorn's power meant nothing. She looked toward the barn, where hope and valor were safe and warm. She had made her choice. She was in this now, all the way. And as the sun began to dip below the snow-covered horizon, she knew the real storm was just beginning. The following days settled into a tense, secret routine. Abigail rose before dawn, her first chore always a quiet trip to the barn to check on hope and valor. She would speak to them in hushed tones, her words puffs of white in the cold air, as she gave them their morning rations of hay and grain. The grain was a painful sacrifice. It was from a small, expensive supply she kept for her own aging horse, Dusty, but Hope needed the extra calories for the full. She took to covering her tracks between the cabin and the barn, using an old broom to sweep the snow, trying to make her path look less traveled. It felt foolish, like a child's game, but Frank Miller's visit had left her deeply unsettled. She felt as though she were being watched, every plume of smoke from her chimney a signal, every light in her window a beacon in the vast, empty landscape. The news of the reward had spread like wildfire. Even with the phone lines still patchy from a storm, word traveled. She could feel in the air. The county was buzzing with the news of Thorne's missing horses. Men who hadn't ridden their own property in years were suddenly saddling up, eager for a chance at Thorne's money. The $5,000 bounty was a powerful motivator in a community where winter often meant tightened belts and mounting bills. Abigail felt increasingly isolated, a prisoner on her own land. A trip to town for supplies was out of the question. Someone would surely ask her if she'd seen anything, and she was a terrible liar. Her face, she knew, would betray her in an instant. So she stayed put, making do with what she had, stretching her meager pantry of canned goods and dried beans a little further each day. Her bond with the horses deepened with every passing hour. They had begun to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. The haunted, fearful look in their eyes was replaced by a soft, trusting warmth. Valor, the magnificent stallion, would nick her a greeting whenever she entered the barn, his ears pricked forward. He would follow her around the stall like a giant, devoted dog. Hope, the gentle mare, was the one who truly held Abigail's heart. She seemed to understand the sacrifice Abigail was making. She would rest her head on Abigail's shoulder, her large, dark eyes full of a wisdom that seemed ancient and profound. Abigail would talk to her for hours, telling her about her grandfather, about her struggles to keep the ranch afloat, about her fears of Marcus Thorne. The mare would listen, a steady, calming presence in the face of Abigail's turmoil. One afternoon, while she was redressing the wound on Hope's leg, she made another chilling discovery. As she was brushing the mare's flank, her fingers found a small, hard lump under the skin. Curious, she gently parted the thick hair. Embedded in the mare's hide was a small metal pellet, like one from a shotgun, but smaller. A pellet gun. The skin around it was scarred over, indicating it was an old wound. Rage, cold and pure, washed over her. Someone had shot this gentle, pregnant mare with a pellet gun. It wasn't the act of a hunter. It was an act of casual, sadistic cruelty. It was the kind of thing a person did for sport. Her image of Marcus Thorne, already dark, became something monstrous. That night, her resolve was tested again. A massive truck with a powerful searchlight mounted on its roof drove slowly down the county road at the edge of her property. It was Thorne's truck. She recognized it from town. The beams swept across her fields, a brilliant, invasive eye probing the darkness. Abigail doused her cabin lights and sank to the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. The light swept past her cabin, lingered on the barn for a terrifyingly long moment, and then moved on. She stayed on the floor for a long time after the truck was gone, trembling. The reality of her defiance was no longer an abstract fear. It was a real and present danger, a searchlight cutting through the night. Thorne was not giving up. He was hunting, and she was hiding his prey. The very next day, The situation took a dramatic turn for the worse. When Abigail went to the barn for the morning check, she found Hope in clear distress. The mare was pacing restlessly in the stall, her sides heaving. She had kicked over her water bucket and hadn't touched her hay. A sheen of sweat coated her neck, despite the biting cold. Abigail's blood turned to ice. She knew the signs. The mare was in labor. It was too soon. By her estimations, the foal wasn't due for at least another few weeks. The stress, the starvation, the journey through the storm, it had all been too much. Hope's body was giving out. Panic seized her. She was not equipped to handle a difficult birth. Her experience was with calves, sturdy creatures that usually needed little help. Thoroughbreds were far more delicate. If something went wrong, and her gut told her something was about to go very wrong, she could lose them both. She could lose Hope and the tiny, unborn foal she had named Promise. She had to get help. But who could she call? The local vet, Dr. Adams, was a good man, but he was young and ambitious. He wouldn't risk his career by getting involved in a dispute with Marcus Thorne. The sheriff was out of the question. Her mind raced through the short list of people in Harmony Creek, and one name surfaced from the depths of her memory. Dr. Samuel Carter. Dr. Carter had been the county vet for 40 years before he retired. He was a legend, a man who could calm the wildest horse with a soft word and a gentle hand. He had been her grandfather's friend. He lived in a small, secluded house on the other side of the valley. He was old, in his late 70s, and some said he had grown eccentric, preferring the company of animals to people. But her grandfather had always said, "Sam Carter has more integrity in his little finger than most men have in their whole bodies. He answers to his own conscience, not to the highest bidder." It was a long shot. The phone lines were still unreliable, and even if she could reach him, would he come? Would he risk involving himself in this mess? She had no other choice. Leaving Hope in Valor's anxious care, she sprinted back to the cabin. She picked up the old rotary phone, her hand shaking as she listened to the crackling dial tone. She dialed the number from a faded list taped to the wall, a number she hadn't called in years. She prayed it would go through. The line hissed and popped. For a moment, she thought it was dead. Then, a voice answered, rough with disuse. "Hello, Dr. Carter." Abigail's voice was a panicked whisper. "It's Abigail Hayes, Jedediah Hayes's granddaughter." There was a pause on the other end. "Abby girl," the old vet said, his voice softening with recognition. "I'll be. I haven't heard that name in a long time. What's wrong? You sound like you've seen a ghost." Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of fear and relief. "I need your help, doctor. It's a horse. A mare. She's foaling, and it's going wrong. It's going very wrong." "All right, calm down now," he said, his tone instantly professional and reassuring. "Tell me where you are." "I'm at my grandfather's ranch. The old Hayes place." "I know it," he said. "Now listen to me, Abigail. There's one more thing you need to tell me. Is this horse yours?" Abigail hesitated, her heart pounding. This was the moment of truth. She could lie, but she knew he would see the brand eventually. Her grandfather had taught her to trust this man. She took a deep breath. "No, sir," she said, her voice barely audible. "She belongs to Marcus Thorne." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, stretching for what felt like an eternity. Abigail held her breath, certain he was about to hang up. Then, Dr. Carter spoke, his voice low and serious. "The snow is deep, but my old truck has chains. I'll be there as fast as I can. Keep her warm, Abigail, and don't let her lie down if you can help it." The line went dead. Help was on the way. But as she hung up the phone, a new fear took hold. By making that call, she had widened the circle of her secret. She was no longer alone in her crime, and she could only pray that her grandfather's faith in Samuel Carter had not been misplaced. The life of the mare and her foal now rested not just in her hands, but in the hands of a man she hadn't seen in a decade. The wait for Dr. Carter was the longest hour of Abigail's life. Every minute that ticked by on the old wall clock felt like an eternity. She spent the time in the barn with Hope, trying to keep the mare on her feet as the doctor had instructed. Hope was in agony, her beautiful face slick with sweat, her breathing coming in ragged gasps. She would try to lie down, to collapse from the pain, but Abigail, with Valor's help, would gently coax her back up. The stallion seemed to understand, nudging Hope's shoulder, circling her restlessly, his own anxiety a palpable force in the small stall. Abigail felt a crushing sense of helplessness. She had brought these animals into her sanctuary, promising them safety, and now she could do nothing but watch as one of them suffered, her life and the life of her foal hanging by a thread. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she heard it, the distant, grinding rumble of an engine. She rushed out of the barn and saw an old, beat-up pickup truck, its tires wrapped in heavy chains, churning its way up her long, snow-covered driveway. Dr. Samuel Carter had arrived. He was just as she remembered him, only older, more weathered, tall and wiry, with a shock of white hair and eyes as blue and clear as a winter sky. He carried a worn leather bag in one hand. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice calm but urgent. "In the barn. This way," Abigail said, leading him inside. Dr. Carter took one look at Hope, and his face grew grim. He set his bag down and approached her slowly, speaking in a low, crooning voice that immediately seemed to have a calming effect on the distressed mare. "Easy now, mother. Easy does it. Let's see what we got here." He ran a practiced hand over Hope's swollen belly, his touch both gentle and firm. He was efficient, his movements economical, wasting no energy. After a quick examination, he turned to Abigail, his expression serious. "The foal's in the wrong position," he said plainly. "It's a breech. We gotta turn it, or we'll lose them both." The words hit Abigail like a physical blow. A breech birth. It was one of the most dangerous complications possible. "Can you do it?" she asked, her voice trembling. He gave her a long, steady look. "I'm going to try, but I'll need your help. Are you squeamish?" "No," she said, shaking her head, her fear giving way to a surge of adrenaline. "Tell me what to do." For the next 2 hours, the barn became an impromptu operating theater. Under Dr. Carter's calm, expert instruction, Abigail became his nurse. She fetched warm water, laid out his instruments on a clean blanket, and held Hope's head, stroking her neck and murmuring words of encouragement. The old vet worked with a focus and skill that belied his age. It was a harrowing, exhausting ordeal. Hope was heroic, fighting through the pain with a strength that amazed them both. Finally, with a last, heroic push from the mare and Dr. Carter's expert guidance, the foal was born. It was a little filly, slick and fragile, with long, wobbly legs. But she wasn't breathing. "No," Abigail whispered, her heart stopping. Dr. Carter didn't hesitate. He grabbed a piece of straw and began vigorously rubbing the foal's tiny body, clearing the fluid from her mouth and nose. "Come on, little one," he grunted, his voice tight with effort. "Come on now. Breathe." For a heart-stopping moment, there was nothing. The filly lay limp and lifeless on the straw. Hope let out a weak, desperate whinny, trying to lift her head to see her baby. And then, the filly's tiny chest gave a sudden, convulsive shudder. She took a sharp, ragged gasp of air, followed by another. Her legs gave a little kick. She was alive. Relief so profound it left Abigail weak-kneed, washed over her. Tears streamed down her face as she watched the tiny creature, a miracle of life born in the most desperate of circumstances. Dr. Carter sat back on his heels, letting out a long, weary breath. He looked exhausted, but a small, satisfied smile touched his lips. "She's a fighter," he said, looking at the foal, then at Hope. "Just like her mother." They gave Hope a few minutes to recover before Dr. Carter helped the wobbly little filly to her feet. He guided her to her mother's side, and after a few fumbling attempts, she found what she was looking for and began to nurse. Hope nuzzled her baby, her soft whinnies a song of pure love. Valor watched over them both, the proud, protective father. A perfect family, whole and safe. Abigail named the filly Promise. With the crisis over, Dr. Carter packed his bag. He moved stiffly, the ordeal having clearly taken a toll on him. Abigail made him a cup of hot coffee back in the cabin, her hands still shaking. They sat in a comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the fire. Finally, the vet spoke, his voice serious. "You know what you've done here, don't you, Abigail?" "I saved 2 horses," she replied softly. "You've stolen them," he corrected gently, but without judgment. "In the eyes of the law, and the owner is not a forgiving man." He took a sip of his coffee. "I saw the pellet gun wound on the mare, and the whip scars. This isn't the first time I've seen Thorne's handiwork. I've had to put down more than one animal he's trained." The confirmation of her suspicions sent a chill down Abigail's spine. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice small. "He's still looking for them. I can't hide them forever." Dr. Carter stared into the flames, his expression thoughtful. "For now, we do nothing. We let Hope and the little one get their strength. In a few days, when they're stronger, we'll have to make a decision." He looked at her, his blue eyes sharp. "You've put yourself in a great deal of danger, girl. You know that, right?" "I know," she said, "but I couldn't just leave them out there to die. My grandfather, he wouldn't have." A warm, proud smile spread across the old vet's face. "No, he wouldn't have. Jedediah Hayes was the most honorable man I ever knew. You just like him." He stood up, placing his empty mug on the table. "I'll be back in 2 days to check on them. Don't talk to anyone. Don't answer your door unless you know who it is. And Abigail," he paused at the door, his expression grave, "be careful." As she watched his truck disappear down the driveway, a fragile sense of hope bloomed in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. She had an ally. But as she looked out at the vast, snow-covered landscape, she knew that Marcus Thorne was still out there. And it was only a matter of time before he came to collect what he believed was his. The confrontation was inevitable, and she could only pray that when it came, she and a semi-retired veterinarian would be enough to stand against the storm. The 2 days following the birth of Promise were a strange and stressful limbo. Abigail's life narrowed to the 4 walls of her cabin and the warm, hay-scented confines of the barn. Every waking moment was dedicated to the horses. She watched, mesmerized, as the tiny foal wobbled and explored her new world, a symbol of fragile, tenacious life. Hope was a doting mother, her recovery swift and steady, her eyes rarely leaving her filly's side. Valor stood as a silent, ever-watchful guardian, a picture of quiet strength. The little family was a beacon of warmth and love in the cold, tense reality of Abigail's life. She found herself talking to them constantly, her voice a low murmur that filled the quiet spaces. She told them stories about her grandfather, about learning to ride on a gentle old mare named Daisy, about the dreams she had for the ranch. In return, they gave her their quiet, unwavering trust. In caring for them, she found a purpose that transcended her fear. She was no longer just surviving. She was protecting. True to his word, Dr. Carter returned. He arrived quietly, his old truck a familiar, reassuring sight. He examined Hope and the foal, pronouncing them both healthy and strong. He changed the mare's bandage, noting with satisfaction that the infection was almost gone. "You've done good work here, Abigail," he said, his praise warming her more than the cabin's fire. "That little one is a miracle." They sat in the cabin again, a comfortable routine already forming between them. Dr. Carter had brought a thermos of strong, hot coffee and a bag of supplies, special high-protein feed for Hope and a milk replacer for the foal, just in case. It was a gesture of solidarity that moved Abigail deeply. "Have you heard anything?" she asked, her voice hushed. Dr. Carter's face grew somber. "The whole county is buzzing. Thorne has doubled the reward, $10,000. He's making it personal now. He's telling everyone the horses were a gift for his ailing wife, that the mare was carrying a foal of priceless lineage. He's painting himself as the victim." Abigail's stomach churned. $10,000. A life-changing sum of money. Enough to make even the most honest neighbor consider snooping around. Thorne wasn't just looking for his property. He was turning the entire community into his posse. "His wife left him 5 years ago," she said bitterly, "and he doesn't have a victimized bone in his body." "We know that," Dr. Carter said, "but people hear that kind of money, and they stop thinking straight. He's had men riding the fence lines of every ranch from here to the mountains. It's only a matter of time before they come knocking on your door." The vet's words proved prophetic. The very next afternoon, as Abigail was carrying a bucket of water from the well, she saw them. 2 men on horseback, silhouetted against the bright snow on the ridge overlooking her property. They weren't moving. They were just watching. One of them raised a pair of binoculars. Abigail's blood ran cold. She forced herself to act normally, to walk at a steady pace back to the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't look back. Once inside, she peeked through the curtain. They were still there, 2 dark sentinels passing judgment on her small, vulnerable ranch. They were Thorne's men. She felt a wave of pure terror. They couldn't have seen the horses, but their presence was a clear message. We're watching you. We're close. She spent the rest of the day in a state of high alert, jumping at every sound. The men on the ridge finally left as dusk began to fall, but their presence lingered like a poison in the air. The ranch no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a trap. That evening, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. What was she thinking? She was a poor, isolated young woman up against the most powerful man in the county. She had a retired vet as her only ally. She had no money, no influence, no power. She was going to lose everything. Her home, her grandfather's legacy, her freedom, all for two horses that didn't even belong to her. She slumped into her grandfather's armchair, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. And for the first time since the ordeal began, she cried. She wept for her grandfather, for her loneliness, for the impossible choice she had made. The tears were a torrent of fear, frustration, and a deep, aching grief. Her quiet sobs were interrupted by a sound from outside. Not the wind, but a soft, insistent scratching at the cabin door. Her fear returned in an instant, sharp and electric. Had Thorne's men come back? She froze, her breath catching in her throat, listening. The scratching came again, gentle but persistent. It wasn't the sound of a man. Slowly, cautiously, she crept to the window and peered out. In the pale moonlight, she saw a figure. It was Dusty, her old bay gelding. He had somehow unlatched the gate of his paddock and had walked up to the cabin. He was standing on her porch, looking at the door, his ears pricked forward. Abigail's fear melted away, replaced by a wave of astonishment and affection. She opened the door, and the old horse whinnied softly, nudging her hand with his muzzle. It was as if he had sensed her despair, her moment of weakness, and had come to offer his own quiet brand of comfort. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck, burying her face in his coarse mane. "Oh, Dusty," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "What am I going to do?" The horse simply stood there, solid and steady, a comforting weight against her. He didn't have any answers, but he was there. And in that moment, his simple, loyal presence was enough. It was a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. She had her small herd of cattle, her faithful old horse, and the precious new family she was protecting in the barn. They were her responsibility. They were her own. Her resolve, which had crumbled into despair, began to reform, stronger than before, forged in the quiet loyalty of an old friend. She would not give up. She would not let Thorne win. She would find a way to protect them all. The next morning, she awoke with a new sense of clarity. Waiting and hiding was a losing game. She had to act. She had to find a way to expose Marcus Thorne for the cruel, abusive man he was. But how? Her word against his would mean nothing. She needed proof. Her mind went back to the pellet gun wound. It was evidence, but it wasn't enough. The whip scars were old. Thorne could easily claim the horses had been injured before he bought them. She needed something undeniable, something that would turn the tide of public opinion, something that would make even the sheriff sit up and take notice. She thought of Dr. Carter. He had mentioned seeing Thorne's cruelty before. Perhaps he had records, or knew of others who had suffered at Thorne's hand. She decided to ride out to the vet's place. It was a risk, leaving the ranch, but staying put was a greater one. She saddled Dusty, his quiet companionship a source of strength. Before she left, she went to the barn. She spent a long moment with Hope, Valor, and the little filly, Promise, who now greeted her with clumsy, affectionate nudges. "I'll be back soon," she whispered, stroking Hope's velvety nose. "I'm going to fix this. I promise." The ride to Dr. Carter's was cold and beautiful. The world was a vast expanse of white and blue, the silence broken only by the crunch of Dusty's hooves in the snow. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of freedom, a small measure of control over her own destiny. Dr. Carter's home was tucked away in a grove of old pine trees, a small, neat cabin with a curl of smoke rising from its chimney. He seemed unsurprised to see her, ushering her inside to the warmth of a roaring fire. She laid out her fears and her fledgling plan. "We need proof, Doctor. Something he can't deny or explain away." Dr. Carter listened patiently, stoking the fire as she spoke. When she was finished, he was quiet for a long time, his brow furrowed in thought. "You're right, of course," he said finally. "Thorne's power comes from his reputation and his money. We have to attack the reputation. If we can show people the monster he really is, the money won't be enough to protect him." He stood up and walked over to a large, dusty filing cabinet in the corner of the room. "I told you I've had to put down animals from his ranch. I'm a vet. I keep records." He pulled open a drawer and began sifting through old, yellowed files. He pulled out one, then another. He laid them on the table in front of Abigail. They were veterinary reports, complete with photographs. A horse with a broken leg that had been left untreated for days. A cow with a gruesome, infected wound from cattle prod. A prize-winning bull, dead from malnutrition. Each file was a story of horrific neglect and abuse, and each was signed with the name Marcus Thorne as the owner. "This is it." Abigail breathed, her heart pounding. "This is the proof." "It's a start," Dr. Carter said grimly. "But many of these are old. Thorne will claim he fired the ranch hand responsible. We need something more. We need another voice. Someone else who is willing to speak up." He looked at Abigail, his expression pained. "There was a young man, a ranch hand named Ben Coolidge. He worked for Thorne a few years back. A good kid, gentle with the animals. He came to me one night, distraught. Thorne had beaten a young colt half to death in a drunken rage because it wouldn't load onto a trailer. Ben tried to intervene. Thorne fired him and then had him arrested on trumped-up charges of theft. Ruined his life. The boy left town not long after. I never knew where he went." The story made Abigail sick to her stomach. If we could find him, if he would be willing to testify, it would be his word against Thorne's, Dr. Carter said. But combined with these records, it might be enough to make people listen. He sighed, running a hand through his white hair. "Finding him is the problem. It's been years. A new, seemingly insurmountable obstacle." But Abigail refused to be discouraged. They had a path forward, however faint. Their conversation was cut short by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Dr. Carter stiffened, his eyes going to the window. A familiar, expensive-looking truck was making its way up his long driveway. It was Marcus Thorne. "Get in the back room," Dr. Carter hissed, his voice low and urgent. "Don't make a sound." Abigail's heart leaped into her throat. She scrambled from her chair and slipped into the small adjoining room, which served as the vet's office and storage, leaving the door open, just a crack. She could hear Dr. Carter moving to the front door, his footsteps heavy. She heard the door open. "Thorne." Dr. Carter's voice was cold and clipped. "What do you want?" "Carter." Thorne's voice was smooth, laced with a false, syrupy friendliness that was more menacing than any shout. "Just paying a visit to an old friend. A man can't check on his neighbors. We're not friends, and you're a long way from your property. I'm looking for something that belongs to me," Thorne said, his voice losing its friendly edge. "2 horses, a stallion and a pregnant mare. I have it on good authority you were the last person to see them." Abigail held her breath, her body rigid with fear. How could he know? Had someone seen the vet's truck at her ranch? "I haven't seen your horses," Dr. Carter said, his voice a flat, steady wall of defiance. There was a short, tense silence. Then, Thorne chuckled a low, ugly sound. "You always were a sanctimonious old fool, Carter. You and that friend of yours, Jedediah Hayes. Both thought you were better than everyone else. Always standing up for the weak, weren't you?" He paused. "His granddaughter is a stubborn one, too. A little bird told me she might have taken in some strays during the storm." Through the crack in the door, Abigail saw Thorne take a step into the cabin. He was a large, imposing man, his face florid, his eyes small and mean. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the table where Abigail had just been sitting, where 2 coffee mugs still stood. His eyes narrowed. "Expecting company." "I like coffee," Dr. Carter said flatly. Thorne took another step, his gaze sweeping the room. His eyes fell upon the filing cabinet. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "You know, I've always wondered what you keep in those old files of yours, Carter. Patient confidentiality and all that. But I'm sure a man of your integrity wouldn't mind if I took a little peek. For old time's sake." He started to walk toward the cabinet. Abigail's world shrank to the tiny space of the back room. He was going to find the files. He was going to find the proof. And he would know, without a doubt, that she and the vet were conspiring against him. They were trapped. The monster was inside the house. Dr. Carter moved with surprising speed for a man his age. He stepped between Thorne and the filing cabinet, his body a frail but unyielding barrier. You'll do no such thing. These are private medical records. Now get out of my house. Thorne laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Private? Don't make me laugh, old man. I own half this county. Everything that happens in it is my business. He shoved Dr. Carter, not hard, but with enough force to send the old vet stumbling backward. Hidden in the back room, Abigail's terror morphed into a white-hot fury. He had abused her horses, ruined a young man's life, and now he was assaulting a respected elder in his own home. Something inside her snapped. The fear that had held her captive for days was burned away by a clean, righteous anger. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, not as a gentle whisper, but as a firm command. There comes a time to stop hiding, Abby girl. There comes a time to fight. She pushed the door open and stepped into the room. Thorne spun around, his eyes widening in surprise, which quickly curdled into a look of triumphant cruelty. Well, he sneered. Look what we have here. The little horse thief herself. I knew it. Came running to your grandfather's old crony for help. Did you? Get away from him, Abigail said, her voice low and steady, surprising even herself with its strength. Or what? Thorne taunted, taking a menacing step toward her. You'll sick your stolen horses on me. I'm here to collect my property, girl, and to see you put in jail where you belong. He turned to Dr. Carter. And you, for aiding and abetting. This is going to cost you both everything. They aren't your property anymore, Thorne, Abigail said, her eyes blazing. Not after what you did to them. The whip marks, the starvation, the pellet lodged in Hope's flank. You don't own animals. You torture them. Thorne's face flushed a dark, dangerous red. The veneer of civility was gone, revealing the raw, violent temper beneath. You lying little witch. I'll ruin you for this. He lunged for her. But as he did, Dr. Carter, who had recovered his balance, did something unexpected. He grabbed a heavy, cast-iron poker from the fireplace hearth and slammed it down on the table, just inches from Thorne's outstretched hand. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. That's enough, Marcus, Dr. Carter said, his voice ringing with an authority Abigail had never heard before. He held the poker not as a weapon, but as a symbol, a line drawn in the sand. This ends now. For a moment, the three of them were frozen in a tense tableau. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and Thorne's heavy, enraged breathing. The standoff was broken by the sound of another vehicle approaching, this one much faster than Thorne's truck. A moment later, the familiar shape of the county sheriff's SUV came into view, pulling up behind Thorne's pickup. A triumphant, ugly smile spread across Thorne's face. It seems my backup has arrived, he sneered. It's over for you too. Sheriff Brody got out of his vehicle, a large, slow-moving man whose loyalty to Thorne was a well-known fact. He ambled up to the porch. Everything all right here, Marcus? No, it is not all right, Brody. Thorne spat, pointing a trembling finger at Abigail. This little thief stole my prize horses, and this old quack helped her hide them. I want them arrested. Both of them. Sheriff Brody looked from Thorne to Dr. Carter, and then to Abigail. He looked uncomfortable, his gaze shifting. Now, Marcus, let's all just calm down. I will not calm down. Thorne roared. Are you going to do your job or not? Before the sheriff could answer, another car pulled into the driveway, a modest, older sedan. A man got out of the driver's side. He was in his late 20s, with a kind, tired face and eyes that held a deep sadness. He looked familiar, but Abigail couldn't place him. Dr. Carter, however, could. A look of profound relief washed over the old vet's face. Ben, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ben Coolidge. The young man nodded, giving the vet a small, nervous smile. Hello, doctor. I got your message. He turned his gaze to Marcus Thorne, and his expression hardened. The sadness in his eyes was replaced by a steely resolve. Thorne's face went pale. What are you doing here? He stammered, his bravado vanishing in an instant. Dr. Carter called me yesterday, Ben said, his voice clear and strong, ringing out in the cold winter air. He told me what was happening. He told me it was time to stop being afraid. He looked directly at Sheriff Brody. Sheriff, my name is Ben Coolidge. 5 years ago, Marcus Thorne beat a colt nearly to death right in front of me. Why try to stop him? He fired me. Then he called you and told you I'd stolen money from him. You arrested me, Sheriff. You didn't ask any questions. You just took his word for it." Sheriff Brody shifted his weight, his face turning a blotchy red. He wouldn't meet Ben's eyes. "I lost everything because of that lie," Ben continued, his voice trembling slightly, but his resolve unbroken. "My reputation, my career. I had to leave town, but I'm not running anymore." He turned his attention back to Thorne. "I'll testify to what I saw, and I'm not the only one. There are others, Thorne, others you've hurt, who you've bullied into silence. But you can't silence all of us." It was the moment the tide turned. The arrival of Ben Coolidge, a ghost from Thorne's past, had changed everything. Thorne's power, built on fear and intimidation, began to crumble. "This is ridiculous," Thorne blustered, trying to regain control. "The ravings of a disgruntled former employee. It means nothing." "Is that so?" Dr. Carter said, stepping forward. He held a sheaf of papers in his hand, the files from his cabinet. "Because I have years of medical records, Marcus. Records of animals from your ranch that have died from neglect, that have been beaten, that have been starved, complete with photographs." He held them out for the sheriff to see. "This is more than one man's word. This is a pattern of criminal cruelty." Sheriff Brody looked at the files, at Ben Coolidge's determined face, at Abigail's defiant stare, and then at Marcus Thorne's crumbling facade. He was a man caught in a current, and he could either be swept away with Thorne or swim for the shore of the truth. From the crowd of neighbors that had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion, a familiar voice called out. It was Frank Miller, Abigail's gruff neighbor. "I saw them horses, Sheriff," he said, stepping forward. "Saw him huddling by the girls' barn in that blizzard. They were half frozen, looked more dead than alive. She didn't steal him. She saved him." Another voice, then another, joined the chorus. People who had long been silent, who had been afraid of Thorne's power, began to speak up. Stories of his cruelty, of his shady business dealings, of his bullying, began to surface, a flood of truth that had been held back for far too long. Marcus Thorne looked around, his face a mask of disbelief. His power, his reputation, his entire world was collapsing around him. He was no longer the feared king of the county. He was just a cruel, pathetic man, exposed for all to see. Defeated, he turned and stormed to his truck, shouting threats and curses that now sounded hollow and impotent. He sped away, leaving a cloud of exhaust and a stunned silence in his wake. In the aftermath, everything changed. An official investigation was launched into Marcus Thorne's ranch. Armed with Dr. Carter's records and Ben Coolidge's testimony, authorities found a scene of horrific neglect. Dozens of animals were seized and taken to safety. Thorne was charged with multiple counts of animal cruelty and fraud. His empire, built on a foundation of fear, had crumbled into dust. The law, which had once been his shield, had become its sword. As for hope, valor, and little promise, the court officially granted Abigail custody. They were hers now, not by theft, but by right. The cloud of fear that had hung over her ranch lifted, replaced by a bright, promising future. The community, awakened from its long slumber of fear, rallied around her. Neighbors brought donations of hay and grain. Ben Coolidge, who had decided to move back to Harmony Creek, offered to help her around the ranch, his quiet competence and gentle nature a welcome presence. One bright spring afternoon, months later, Abigail stood on her porch, watching her horses graze in the greening pasture. Valor stood tall and proud, a magnificent guardian. Hope, her leg now fully healed, watched over her filly. And Promise, a gangly, energetic foal, kicked up her heels and raced across the field, a perfect picture of life and joy. Dr. Carter drove up in his old truck. He didn't visit as a vet anymore, but as a friend. He sat beside her on the porch swing, and they watched the horses together. "You know," he said, a warm smile on his face, "your grandfather would be so proud of you, Abigail. You did more than save those horses. You saved this whole community from a sickness it didn't even know it had." Abigail looked out at the land, her land, and at the animals that were now her family. The ranch was no longer a burden, a mountain of debt and struggle. It was a sanctuary, a place of healing and hope. She had faced the storm, both the one in nature and the one in man, and she had not only survived, but she had triumphed. She had learned that true strength wasn't about power or money. It was about kindness. It was about having the courage to open your door to those in need, to stand up for the voiceless, and to fight for what is right, no matter the cost. She had given nature a reason to notice her, just as her grandfather had said. And in return, nature had given her a family, a future, and a profound, unshakable peace. The long, hard winter was finally over. Spring had come to the valley and to her heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.